creation of Manchukuo. Having completed the occupation of Manchuria in early January 1932, the Kwantung Army began implementing its plan to create an independent state in Manchuria in order to establish its dominance over it. The idea of turning Manchuria into an independent state was hatched by the military in part of 206 reactionary elements long before the incident. Directly in Manchuria, the headquarters of the Kwantung Army, Japanese military intelligence, the Information Service of the South Ural Railway and other organizations began to prepare for the implementation of this plan. With the occurrence of the incident, all these organizations were launched, as well as all kinds of Black Hundred adventurers who arrived in Manchuria from Japan. An autonomous government was created in Mukden, led by the head of Japanese military intelligence, Colonel Toyohiro Kenji. Subsequently, as Japanese troops advanced, autonomous governments were created in the provinces of Mukden and Jiren. Nominally, these autonomous governments were led by representatives of local militarist cliques who maintained close ties with the Japanese military, as well as senior officials of the Manchurian dynasty. These governments did not enjoy the support of the people and were far from the masses. Despite the fact that universally established self-government bodies functioned under the leadership of the Japanese authorities, chaos reigned in the country, caused by the fact that the Kwantung Army, military intelligence, the EMSD and other bodies, each at their discretion and based on their own plans, intervened in the leadership of these bodies. Every kind of adventurers snooped around. There was not even a single plan of action. However, as events unfolded, the leadership of self-government bodies passed into the hands of the Kwantung Army. As a result of the successful development of hostilities, the command of the Japanese forces began to act more confidently and, disregarding the opinion of the government, intensively implemented the plan for turning Manchuria into an independent state. Back in October 1931, both within Manchuria itself and beyond, it became known that the Kwantung Army was planning to turn this region of China into an independent state. At first, the Japanese government declared to the world that it had no 207 territorial claims against Manchuria. Based on this, and also taking into account the international situation, it was afraid to exacerbate the Manchu incident. But the government did not have the forces that could prevent the command of the Japanese forces, which had intensified their actions, from implementing plans for Manchuria. The government turned out to be an observer. All that was left for him was to follow how events unfolded and the course towards the creation of Manchu was implemented. After the formation of the Inukai cabinet, the government itself began to intensively support the military and silently approved the plans of the Kwantung Army. The following circumstances strengthened the determination of the Japanese army on the continent and especially the Kwantung Army to create an independent state in Manchuria. Firstly, the successful use of Puyi, the deposed emperor of the Manchurian dynasty, in the political arena, and secondly, a group of observers led by Lytton visited Manchuria. To create even a formally independent state, the Japanese command lacked representatives of the old military cliques and officials of the Manchu dynasty, so the Japanese military turned their eyes to Puyi, the last emperor of this dynasty, who was hiding in the Japanese settlement in Tianjin. Under the protection of the Japanese convoy, Puyi was brought to Manchuria. At the beginning of 1932, the League of Nations agreed to some extent with the arguments of Japan, referring to the specific situation prevailing in Manchuria, but before making a final decision, she decided to send a group of observers there. For this purpose, the Lytton Commission was created. The arrival of Lytton's group was expected in April, in connection with which it was decided to separate Manchuria from China before this time, in order to put the Commission before a fait accompli. The separation of Manchuria was also planned in order to justify the presence of Japanese troops in the territory of Manchuria. 208. The plan for the creation of an independent state, in the implementation of which the Kwantung Army played the main role, began to be intensively implemented. On March 1, the state of Manchuria was created, which put forward a broadcast program that proclaimed the fairest form of government and the implementation of the Community of Five Nations. In the new state, the supreme power belonged to the Emperor Puyi, and the other important posts were occupied by the former vassal of the Manchu dynasty Zheng Zhaozu, the leaders of the local militarist cliques Zhang Jinghai, Zhang Haipeng, Ma Zhangsan and others. However, the independence of the new state was purely formal. 3. May 15 events. Japan reactionary forces. Events in Manchuria inspired the reactionary movement in Japan. As the Manchu events developed, renovationist groups in the army and nationalists intensified their militaristic activities. The nationalist movement in the country has entered a new stage. In the early years of Meiji, reactionary organizations such as the Black Ocean Society and the Black Dragon Society were known in Japan. All these organizations during the Meiji and Taisho period were limited only to behind-the-scenes activities and did not have much influence on Japanese society. During the Taisho period, when the contradictions of capitalism escalated and the social movement took on a wide scope, reactionary organizations such as the Society Against the Red Danger and the Nationalist Society appeared, fighting against the growth of the social movement. But even they were a simple gathering of gamblers and bandits who, with their Black Hundred activities, were eager to gain some rights and earn their livelihood. 209. The sprouts of modern nationalism appeared after the onset of the general crisis of capitalism. Immediately after the rice riots that broke out in 1918, the Rosakai Society arose, reflecting the general trend of that time. It brought together new right-wing elements, including defectors from the left camp like Sakai Toshihiko and Takahata Motoyuki, the most extremist elements of the right forces like Kitaki and Okawa Sumai, representatives of the right wing of political parties, such as Oikintaro and Nakano Masanori, as well as capitalists, military, etc. The Rosakai Society, which served as the basis for the creation of a number of similar organizations that participated in the nationalist movement, was a conglomeration of individual social groups divorced from real reality, and so it soon fell apart. However, it brought to life such organizations, but these organizations brought together mainly individuals, did not have a wide social base and limited their activities to the street. With their behind-the-scenes machinations, they influenced a certain part of the higher political circles, but on the whole did not represent any serious social force. The nationalist movement for the first time began to turn into a social force after the crisis, when the class struggle intensified. The upsurge of the revolutionary movement was outlined, and when this movement managed to attract to some extent the petty bourgeoisie, which was ruined as a result of the crisis. The social fascists saw that in Italy the Nazis managed to seize power, and in Germany the Nazis raised their heads. They were no longer satisfied with the Patriot Society, which was a gathering of bandits acting on the feudal principle of worshipping the strong. Therefore, they began to create mass nationalist organizations, using brutal repressions for this purpose. 210, which brought the authorities to the revolutionary movement on March 15 and April 16. In 1929, Takahagamoto Uki, Tsukubi Tetsuo and their supporters created the Radical Patriotic Party Kyoshin Kokuto, the program of which said that the party won, he will sincerely represent the entire Japanese people, united around the emperor, and hopes for the support of the people in the interests of expanding their ranks. 2. He is aware of the place that Japan occupies in the international labor movement, and hopes that, along with the elimination of class contradictions within the country, it will actively participate in the international arena. In addition, Takahata and others, in order to subjugate the trade unions, created the Workers' Union of the Radical Patriots, which was the grassroots organization of their party. In the spring of 1930, Amano Tetsuo, Okawa Sumai and their supporters created the Patriotic Workers' Party Eikoku Kunrodo and the Patriotic Union of Proletarian Youth Eikoku Muzan Sainon-domei. In order to unite the numerous dispersed nationalist organizations, in 1931 the All-Japan Council for the Joint Struggle of Patriotic Organizations Zenachikoku Shiokyoto Toso Kyogaikai was created, which included the Kotisha Society, the Radical Patriotic Party, the State Construction Society Kinkokukai and others, as well as the Great Japan Production Party Daihikinsai Santo, uniting the Black Dragon Society, the Japanese People's Party Nihon Kokuminaito, Youth of Great Japan Daihikinsai Nanto, and a number of Rights X Kyoto and Osaka unions. The All-Japan Council for Joint Struggle launched fascist activity, putting forward such pseudo-socialist slogans as 1. The destruction of parliamentarism, 2. The overthrow of capitalism, 3. The elimination of class contradictions within the country, 4. Strengthening the power of the state. In contrast, the Production Party, speaking in its political program for the unity 211 of the monarch and the people, for autarky, was a party that held the positions of Japaneseism. The nationalist movement, combining such organizations with their programs described above, in essence, could not win over the broad working masses. It gained the support of a decaying labor aristocracy and the leadership of government-controlled unions. Gradually, the organization of this movement turned into gangsters, which were used to suppress strikes. This is eloquently indicated by the following fact. In the second election held by the Inukai government in 1932, nationalists who tried to turn their nationalist groups into mass organizations put forward a large number of candidates for parliament, but this venture ended in complete failure. Thus, the attempt to spread the nationalist movement to the working masses was limited, as always, to one hype and was unsuccessful. The Council of the Joint Struggle and the Production Party failed to increase the number of its members. The significance of this nationalist movement is perhaps due to the fact that, thanks to the activities of Adosya and Kodisya, it influenced the political and financial circles, as well as the bureaucracy and the military, raising a leading group of hired fascists. Kita Ikki, taking advantage of his ties with the Nishida-ye group, found among the high command of the Army and Navy those who earnestly believed in the ideas set forth in his book Basic Principles of the Plan for the Reconstruction of Japan, and Okawa Sumai established through his acquaintances contact with the highest political, financial and military circles. October events at that time, and among the militarians, those who invested a new meaning in nationalist ideas raised their heads. The issue of creating the Sakura Society, as well as the March events, has already been discussed above. However, the Manchu 212 incident inspired the renewal groups in the army for new conspiracies and adventures. Having been defeated in the March events, members of the Sakura Society Hashimoto, Naga, Okawa and their supporters immediately embarked on new plans. Events that were a continuation of the March events include, firstly, the Manchu incident provoked in September 1931 by headquarters officers of the Kwantung Army, and secondly, the so-called October events, which aimed at the reconstruction of the country. It is only natural that state socialism of Hashimoto, Okawa and others turned out to be a theory that required a firm foreign policy. Much has been said that the capture of Manchuria is necessary to ensure state defense. But it is quite natural that there existed forces that insisted on external armed aggression in order to renew the situation inside the country. The materials of the Tokyo trial convincingly prove that the head of Japanese military intelligence and Mukden, Toyohara Kenji, as well as Hashimoto and Naga, under the leadership of the headquarters of the Kwantung Army, developed a detailed plan of action in Manchuria and that everything further was played out, like in a theater. On September 18, an explosion occurred on the Iron Road, and on the same night, Japanese troops captured the cities of Mukden and Changchun. However, the objective conditions discussed in the previous chapter also contributed to the fact that events in Manchuria were unfolding according to the plan of Toyohara, Hashimoto and Naga. The Sakura Society. This society was preparing a meeting to discuss the Manchu issue that took place in Tokyo in early August, developed a plan according to which it should, using the Manchu incident, immediately make a coup. As soon as the Manchu incident arose, Naga, who was in Beijing, secretly returned to Tokyo and took refuge in the Golden Dragon Hotel in Tsukadai. Make the hotel his headquarters, he began to prepare for the 213 implementation of the conspiracy. The operation was entrusted to Hashimoto Kongoro. A large number of senior officers, members of the Sakura Society led by Nemoto Hiroshi and Keiji's Teisho, as well as civilians associated with the Kotisha organization, led by Okawa Sumai, took part in preparing the plot. A detailed plan was developed, according to which the coup was planned to be carried out on October 18, that is, exactly 1 month after the Manchu incident occurred. It was supposed to kill Prime Minister Wakatsuki, Foreign Minister Saidahara, Minister of the Keeper of the Press Makino, to cause unrest in Tokyo and, having called in troops, to impose martial law. Then the rebels intended to form a new government and begin to pursue a policy of state socialism. Araki Sato intended to make prime minister. The remaining ministerial posts were to be occupied by Okawa, Hashimoto, Tatekawa, Naga and others. It is said that during the preparation of the conspiracy the conspirators for several days drank soundly in a restaurant with prostitutes, considering themselves the heroes of a future coup. Young officers from among the junior officers, outraged by the behavior of their leaders, left this group and, creating a new group Kodoka, began to act independently. He financed the Okawa conspiracy, closely associated with higher financial circles. At the last moment, the plan was discovered by the chief of the operational department of the General Staff, Colonel Imamura, and then the Minister of War and senior army officials. The Army Command, which followed a more realistic course after the events of March, ordered the arrest of Hashimoto and Naga, thereby preventing a conspiracy. However, just like during the March events, none of the conspirators was punished. The main instigators were only transferred to new duty stations and demoted. After the failure of the October events, the Sakura Society disintegrated. However, at the Tokyo process, Wakatsuki Reihiro showed that under the influence of the conspiracy 214, there was a serious change in the policy that was carried out before and after the resignation of Wakatsuki's cabinet, and that Araki, the new Minister of War in the Inukai government, who began to pursue a more active policy in an atmosphere of silence of the conspiracy, significantly strengthened its position. This indicates that the October events were of great importance. As a result of the defeat of the October events, contradictions arose between the groups of Kodoka and Toseik. Most senior officers of the General Staff and other central institutions, this part of the officers played a major role in the March and October events, abandoned the plan for the country's reconstruction through a coup d'état, for it saw that there was little chance of its implementation. This is explained by the fact that after the Manchu events in the country, the political situation of the military immediately strengthened. Therefore, the military, and without resorting to a conspiracy, could gradually achieve its goal, namely, to achieve maximum appropriations for military spending. That is why the militarist has established closer contact with the reform bureaucracy, which has revived in all government agencies, as well as with representatives of the new Ayukawa, Mori and other concerns, and with a young aristocracy like Kono Fumimaro and Kido Koichi, consisting of reformist elements of the imperial court. A meeting of representatives of the Kinkai Gakuen Society, the State Support Society, Kanem led by the Asamishikai Society and others was convened, at which a plan for the reconstruction of the country was discussed in detail. However, the young officers from among the junior officers sharply opposed the establishment of contact with the Zaibatsu and the bureaucracy and did not want to abandon a plan of armed struggle. Subsequently, the group of Araki and Maezaki became known as Kodoha, and the first group, which insisted on strengthening 215 the control of the army to suppress the activities of the Kodoha group, was called Tosia. However, the contradictions between the two groups temporarily slowed down the activities of supporters of reforms in the army, who were assigned the main role in the plan of armed struggle developed by the right-wing camp. The movement was led by the Kyoshinha Group, the right-wing organization of civilians, which provoked the so-called events related to the Blood Brotherhood Union, and the events of May 15. Blood Brotherhood Union on February 9, 1932, in the midst of the pre-election campaign waged by the Inukai government, former Finance Minister Inoue Junisuke, head of the election committee of the opposition Minsaido Party, was killed during a rally in Hongo Elementary School. The murder was committed by Onam Masashi, a young village boy from Ibaraki Prefecture. On March 5 of the same year, in front of the Mitsubishi Bank building, Mitsubishi Ginko, Dan Takuma was killed, who held one of the leading positions in Mitsubishi concern and enjoyed great influence in financial circles. Haizuna Meguro turned out to be the killer. Thanks to the fact that the killers were caught by the police, it became known that behind them was a secret organization, the so-called Blood Brotherhood Union, which was trying to commit a whole series of murders. The head of this organization, Inoue Han, and more than 10 others were arrested. The Blood Brotherhood Alliance, with 30 members and led by Inoue Han, was a terrorist organization. In addition to the assassination of Inoue and Dan, its members also intended to attempt assassination of Ikeda Shihen, Saionji Komoti, Wakatsuki Reihiro, and other political and financially influential people. The union aimed at the destruction of political parties, zaibatsu, as well as the old forces of the privileged classes. 216. The leader of the Blood Brotherhood Union, Inoue Han, was born in the family of a rural doctor. Leaving his studies at the institute, he went to Manchuria. Upon returning to his homeland, Inoue became a follower of the Buddhist sect Nichiren-shu, filled with the desire to build Ryogokoku temples in the villages of Ibaraki Prefecture. During these years, he was patronized by former court minister Toanaka Mitsuaki. Observing directly the beggarly life of the village, Inoue Han was inspired by updated ideas, became close to Okawa Sumai and the officers of the aviation unit in Tsuchiura, not far from his village. He united his followers and influenced them. As Inoue's origin and all activities show, he adhered to peasant ideology and reflected the ideas and aspirations of the ruined petty rural bourgeoisie. At the trial, Inoue stated, "The ruling classes care only about their own interests and, hiding behind beautiful words, pretend that they do not see the peasants dying right in the field. In order to make the ruling classes aware of this, it is necessary to hit them on the head with a heavy iron hammer. We must prepare hard for this." As you can see from these words of Inoue, the Blood Brotherhood Union fought for a certain idea, with the village taking center stage. All 30 members of the union came from the village and were influenced by Inoue. This is evidenced by at least such a fact. Speaking about the reason that prompted him to kill Finance Minister Inoue, Onuma immediately after committing the crime said, "You can't endure seeing a beggarly life. This all happens because the policies of the former finance minister were bad." The actions of the Blood Brotherhood Union from the very beginning were terrorist acts organized by reactionary forces. In scale, these events, in contrast to the March and October events, were insignificant, but they seriously excited 217 the higher political and financial circles. The people also began to worry about the onset of fascism. May 15 events. On May 15, 1932, when events related to the activities of the Blood Brotherhood Union were still fresh in memory, new events arose that excited the entire public of the country, which, thanks to the cessation of hostilities in Shanghai, gradually began to calm down. On the afternoon of May 15, a military detachment, breaking into 4 groups, attacked the residence of Prime Minister Inakai and Minister of Press Keeper Makino, the police department, the board of the Seiukai Party, the Japanese Bank and the Mitsubishi Genko Bank. At the residence of the Prime Minister, the putschists killed the Prime Minister Inakai from a pistol, who tried to appease them by saying, if you say, I understand. The putschists also resorted to weapons in other places. They threw grenades in front of the entrance to the buildings, etc. After that, the participants in the coup confessed to the gendarmerie. On the same night, several civilian coup groups attacked transformer substations in Tabata, Onitogawa, Kamedo, Hatogayi, Mayuro, Yodobashi, but they failed to disable the substations, as all the putschists were arrested. The attack on the Prime Minister's residence was attended by Navy Lieutenants Koga Kiyoshi, Nakamura Yoshio, Mikami Takashi, and 12 cadets of the Naval Officers School. The attack on transformer substations was made by 16 people, members of the chauvinistic organization Ikyoduku. In addition to the direct participants in the conspiracy, the putschists were supported by Okawa Sumai, Toyama Hizudo, Hama Kenichiro, and other prominent representatives of the right-wing forces who took part in the development of the rebellion plan. All of them were arrested. The head of the Ikyoduku organization, Takabana Kojiburo, who fled to Manchuria, was also arrested. 218 After the death of Prime Minister Inakai, the government immediately resigned. In the current situation, the Seikai party did its best to immediately elect the party chairman and begin to form a new government. At that time, there was a split within the party. In addition to the groups Suzuki's Enzaburo, Hatoyama Itairo and Morikaku, new groups appeared in it, led by Tokom's Takehiro and Kuhara Fuzanasuke. In addition, the so-called Old Seikai group, led by Okazaki Kunisuke, Okitsuki Keisuke, Maeda Yenizo and others, was engaged in a factional struggle, and her forces were dispersed. It was expected that in this regard, confusion would occur in the Seikai party. But on October 7, Suzuki's Enzaburo was elected party chairman, and Seikai set about creating a new government. In the tense situation created after the events of May 15, the lower classes were very strong against the creation of a party government. Due to the fact that the main culprits of the events of May 15 were representatives of the naval circles, the Navy refrained from expressing its point of view on the composition of the government. But the Army, and especially the High Army Command, openly advocated the creation of a government of national unity. Morikaku's group from the Seikai party, closely associated with the military, nominated Hiranuma, deputy chairman of the Privy Council and head of the Foundation Society, as prime minister. The Seikai party, which had a majority in parliament, supported this proposal. She sought to create a strong government and, acting in alliance with the military, the Minsaido Party, although it has put forward with its slogan support for the principle of parliamentarism, actually opposed the Seikai party's cabinet. She wanted to create such a government of national unity in which the Minsaido Party would play a major role. A bureaucracy affiliated with Minsaido, led by Sawa Takeo, launched behind-the-scenes activities 219 aimed at creating a government led by Saito Makoto. To save the situation, it was necessary to somehow smooth out the contradictions between political parties and the military. The meeting between the chairman of the Seikai Suzuki Party and Minister of War Araki seemed to lead to an agreement between the two movements, but in fact it excited the high command of the army and intensified protests against the creation of a party government. Jean Rosainji Kimoti arrived from Okitsu shortly thereafter to recommend the emperor a prime minister. Saionji showed the utmost discretion by discussing this matter with acting Prime Minister Takahashi, Minister of Press Keeper Makino, Chairman of the Privy Council of Karatami, former Prime Ministers of Kira and Wakatsuki, military and naval ministers, as well as Marshals Uehara and Togo and others, and then proposed to the Emperor the candidacy of Admiral Saito, the former Governor-General in Korea. Offering this candidacy, Saionji, on the one hand, sought to prevent the seizure of power by the military or the right-wing elements closely connected with it, and on the other, he took into account not only the protests of the army, but also the actual situation of political parties that lost contact with the masses. Saionji hoped that by proposing a candidate from among the naval officers in a moderate position, he would be able to mitigate the contradictions between the army and the government, avoid new unpleasant events, such as the events of May 15, gradually restore calm in the country and cancel the system's so-called emergency time. Saito Government Agricultural Policy Saito Mikoto, who was entrusted with the formation of the government, first of all wished to leave Takahashi as finance minister. Having obtained the prior consent of the latter 220, he met with the chairman of the Tsukuyi and Mensaito parties and asked them to support him. The Saito-formed government included representatives from the military, bureaucracy, and political parties. It was the so-called Cabinet of National Unity. In the new government, the Tsukuyi party received 3 ministerial posts, and the Mensaito party was given 2 posts. The fact that the new government was formed more than 10 days after the events of May 15 testified to a serious upheaval within the ruling classes. Araki, who was responsible for the events of May 15, was left as Minister of War. This was done so that in that alarming situation Araki restrained the young officers and exercised control over the army. Goto Fumio, one of the representatives of the bureaucracy in the Ministry of the Interior who had joined the Sawatakio group, was appointed Minister of Agriculture and Forestry. Yet the main figures in the government were Prime Minister Saito, Minister of Finance Takahashi, Tsukuyi Party, and Minister of the Interior Yamamoto Tetsuo, Mensaito Party. These people, wanting to ease the tension of the situation, began to pursue a compromise conservative policy. The participation of the so-called peasant fighting detachments in the events of May 15 indicated that the peasants were still seized with anxiety caused by the severe agrarian crisis. A week after the formation of the Saito government, the 62nd Extraordinary Session of Parliament opened, at which an additional budget was adopted. Most of it went to finance expenses related to the Manchu events. The parliament was constantly besieged by delegations with petitions demanding financial assistance to the village. There were 2 types of petition movement. The first included such performances, the participants of which sincerely demanded an improvement in the economic situation of the village. To the second 221, the type included purely fascist actions, the participants of which sought, using the petition movement, to achieve social reforms. The main role in fascist actions was played by the Council of Self-Governing Peasant Organizations (Jidinaman-kyogai-kai). This organization, proclaiming the priority of agriculture in the country's economy, advocated autonomy, autarky and mutual assistance of the village. Under the petition of this council, which contained the requirement to postpone the maturity of the peasant debt for 3 years, to provide material assistance to the peasants in the purchase of fertilizers at the rate of 1 yen for each tang of land, to pay 50 million yen to peasants wishing to leave for Manchuria and Mongolia. They signed 32,000 peasants from 16 prefectures, such as Nagano, Niigata, Ibaraki and others. Judging by the slogans it put forward, this movement reflected the demands of the middle and well-known part of the wealthy layers of the peasantry and did not at all take into account the vital demands of tenants who advocated for land rights and lower rents. As Nakano Akira noted, this petition movement arose in protest of society's neglect of peasants. His goal was to unite all the peasants of Japan. As for the slogans proclaimed in the petitions, then, as Nakano wrote, they did not attach much importance. 56. Following Nagano Prefecture, where 5,000 signatures were collected under the petition, a petition movement broke out in other prefectures. All petitions were interconnected. In the course of this movement, a special tactics of struggle was born, which boiled down to the following. Among the soldiers coming from peasants, signatures were collected, uniting peasant soldiers in this way. Signatures were collected in each regimental district, and 222. Then the petition was sent to the emperor through the chief of the regimental district. This method of petitioning did not exist before. The Japanese State Socialist Party supported such tactics. All this testified to the fact that fascism sought to carry out its plans, relying on the military. This was a feature of the fascist movement in Japan. Encouraged by the speeches of the right, the National Society of Heads of Towns and Villages Zenkoku Tazamtekai and the Council of Heads of Peasant Communities Nokato Kyogaikai also entered into a petition struggle. On the other hand, the National Peasant Union acted as a united front with the National Workers and Peasants Mass Party Zenkoku Ranate Seuto. Representatives of these organizations went to the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry and demanded a 5-year delay in paying off peasant debt, paying taxes and rents, and also prohibiting the confiscation of land from peasants. Under pressure from the peasants, 54 parliamentarians elected from rural constituencies convened a meeting of interested deputies, at which it was decided to influence all political parties and force Seiukai and Minsaito to draft a draft resolution on providing material assistance to peasants through Parliament and urgently convene an extraordinary session of Parliament to develop measures to provide material assistance to the most needy peasants, fishermen, medium and small entrepreneurs. However, this caused only confusion in the parliament, as a result of which the solution of this issue was postponed until the next session. But the government, which foresaw the difficulties that would stand in the way of resolving the agrarian problem, activities to assist the village were discussed at the 63rd session of Parliament. The draft measures 223 proposed by the government and advocated reviving the village on its own, provided for the adoption of a number of urgent measures, mainly related to construction work. The assistance provided by the project turned out to be so insignificant that they said about it, "It is almost nothing." The measures included an allocation over 3 years, from 1932 to 1934, of 1,600 million yen, including 800 million yen for construction work, 600 million yen for work in the center, and 200 million for the periphery, and 800 million to pay low interest on capital. By carrying out these measures, the government hoped to prevent an explosion of public discontent. Of the total amount allocated to assist the village, it was planned to spend 113 million yen in 1932 and 185 million in 1933. Along with providing material assistance to the village, a campaign was launched for reviving the village on its own. This campaign was carried out mainly by the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Education, whose task was to raise the morale of the peasants. As for the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, it sought to give agriculture a planned character. A distinctive feature of the activities to assist the village was that in this case they were limited to providing financial assistance to local banks, landowners, the middle strata of the peasantry, and the implementation of construction work. The requirements of tenants who were hit hard by the crisis were completely disregarded. Moreover, the government, referring to the emergency time and calling for the revival of the village on its own, tried in every possible way to reduce the allocation even to those events that were adopted by the parliament. Thus, the government, on the one hand, carried out these half measures to assist the village, and on the other, taking into account the danger that the extremely difficult situation of the peasants and especially tenants and the poorest peasants could lead 224 to strengthened control over the peasant movement. Even before the opening of the 63rd session of Parliament, the police department was instructed to establish strict control over the petition movement, because there was a danger of turning it into a mass movement with the participation of right and left forces. In addition, at a meeting of heads of police departments of the prefectures, an order was given to establish strict control over the collective actions of the peasants. At that time, in addition to the petition movement, which sent its demands directly to Tokyo, mass movements arose throughout the country, sending their petitions to the village administrations and prefectural administrations. Especially strong were performances in the prefectures of Tochigi and Akita. These speeches of the peasants, manifested in the form of creating societies for the struggle for rice, as well as in the form of mass demonstrations held under the slogan "Give us rice," merged with the struggle against the landlords. Fearing the expansion of this struggle, the government intensified repression against peasants. It very often forbade even the publication of information about peasant uprisings. Such information was kept strictly confidential from the public. Fascism planted from above. As noted above, the fascist movement, which took advantage of the unrest of the peasants, immediately after the Manchu events took on a wider scope. But in late 1932, early 1933, it experienced a period of stagnation. This was due to the following social reasons. Firstly, no matter how insufficient the measures to assist the village, they nevertheless began to be carried out, and secondly, prices for rice and silk cocoons were increased, which somewhat reassured the village. It must also be borne in mind that the command of the army and its main officer backbone have become more circumspect. Immediately after the events of May 15 in the 225 Navy issued an order on strengthening military discipline, forbidding soldiers to meddle in politics. It was forbidden in the army to create any kind of military society. The connection between the military and the fascist civilian organizations was significantly weakened, so organizations based on the military turned out to be powerless. These changes in the behavior of the military were explained by the fact that in the situation prevailing after the Manchu events, it had the opportunity to openly influence the foreign and domestic policies of the government. An important role was also played by the fact that Saito's cabinet, not wanting to aggravate relations with the military, himself contributed to its nomination. Political parties also began to cooperate with the military, which was evident, for example, during the nomination of a draft resolution on the recognition of Manchukuo. This tendency manifested itself especially strongly among the right-wing proletarian party Musin Saito. In connection with such changes, the Zaibatsu began to pursue the so-called self-control policy. In April 1932, the Mitsui and Mitsubishi groups provided their first foreign loan of 20 million yen for a period of 7 years after the establishment of Manchukuo for 5% per annum. After the events of May 15, these concerns donated 3 million yen each for unemployment and social assistance. Sumitomo has donated 1 million yen. These concerns headed for the so-called restructuring of the Zaibatsu. The incident, caused in July 1933 by a detachment of divine soldiers, was a peculiar phenomenon in the history of Japanese fascism in the sense that this time the reaction intended to carry out reconstruction of the country by mass attraction of civilians to fascist organizations. However, this venture perished in the bud. The arrest of the leaders of fascist organizations during the events of May 15 and the July incident of 1933 weakened the fascist movement, which did not have 226 strong mass organizations, but was based solely on personal ties. In addition, the organizers of the July incident were exposed that they took money from exchange dealers, as a result of which they lost all confidence. Along with the growth of political and social movements, monopoly capital gradually developed. This development came at the expense of huge military spending and was the result of a loan policy. At the same time, a bureaucracy entered the arena, replacing former political parties and beginning to instill fascism from above, the driving force of which was the military, and who sought to openly implement changes to the dominant system of Japan. Taking advantage of the military's attacks on political parties and putting forward the slogan for the recovery of political circles, the bureaucracy increased its strength and strengthened its position using control over the economy. In December 1932, the Code on the Social Status of Officials was changed, which guaranteed the bureaucracy the preservation of its official position and was one of the reasons for its appearance. Previously, party governments, under the pretext of protecting the interests of state institutions, could, at their discretion, relieve officials from their posts. Now, this required the consent of the Commission to determine the social status of civil servants, and since this commission consisted of senior officials, this significantly strengthened the position of the bureaucracy. Previously, more than 300 officials were replaced annually in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and only 30 after a change in the code. Such changes contributed to increasing the political influence of the bureaucracy. Utada diplomacy, scorched earth diplomacy. Saito's government, the nature of which was discussed above, in its foreign policy blindly followed the foreign policy of the military. The Manchu events were the first event 227 of this course. As a result, Japan's relations with other countries were extremely complicated and the country embarked on the path of international isolation. It is understandable that the external aggression carried out by the militarism was fully in the interests of monopoly capital, and therefore the latter did not speak out decisively against such a policy. However, The monopolists were afraid that such a foreign policy could cause a clash with the great powers, and then Japan would be in a very difficult situation. But until such a danger existed, they took into account all the requirements of the military, thus trying to avoid aggravation of relations within the country. In July 1932, the former president of UMST, a native of diplomatic circles, Uchida Yasutoshi, was again appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs. At the 63rd session of the Uchida Parliament in August of the same year, in response to the insistent demands of Morikaku, he acknowledged Manchukuo. The events in Manchuria and Mongolia were caused solely by the self-defense interests of our empire. It must be stated that we are determined to uphold the principle of national unity and will not step back a single step, even if for this we have to resort to the scorched earth tactics. In other words, Uchida insisted on the implementation of the scorched earth diplomacy. One manifestation of this scorched earth diplomacy was the recognition in September 1932 of the state of Manchu. The same diplomatic course led Japan to withdraw from the League of Nations in March 1933. Earlier, on March 1, 1932, under the hidden leadership of the Kwantung Army, Manchukuo and Puyi, who came from the Qing dynasty, was appointed ruler of this country. In June, at a meeting of the lower house of the Japanese parliament, a resolution was adopted unanimously on the immediate recognition of Manchukuo proposed by the Seikai and Mensaito parties. 228 As a preparatory event for the recognition of Manchu, it was decided to establish a new post of the Japanese ambassador in Manchuria, which would coordinate the activities of all Japanese institutions located there. In addition, he was entrusted with the functions of the commander of the Kwantung Army and the commander of the Kwantung region. In August, the commander of the Kwantung Army, General Mutonobuyoshi, was appointed Japanese ambassador to Manchuria, and the chief of the Kwantung region, and Deputy War Minister Koisho Chief of Staff of the Army and at the same time head of the Special Division. This department, in essence, was the highest body that exercised control over the economy of Manchuria. The Japan-Manchu Protocol was signed on September 15, and thus the state of Manchu was recognized by Japan. The Japanese-Manchurian Protocol consisted of only 2 paragraphs, which stated that Manchukuo recognizes the rights and interests of Japan and Japanese citizens in Manchukuo, and that Japan and Manchukuo carry out joint defense of the country, and Japanese troops remain on the territory of Manchukuo. So under the guise of concluding an international agreement, the dominance of the Kwantung Army over Manchuria was authorized. Even before the signing of the Japanese-Manchu Protocol, Puyi, in a letter dated March 10, 1932, addressed to the commander of the Kwantung Army, noted, 1. Manchukuo provides all the military facilities necessary for the Kwantung Army and incurs the costs associated with the operation of these structures, and Japan provides defense of the new state and public peace in the country. 2. Japan exercises control over all existing railways and other transport facilities, and also gives an indication of the construction of new ones that it considers necessary for itself. 3. The officials of all government institutions in Manchu will be the Japanese. Moreover, the appointment, as well as the release or dismissal will be made by the commander of Kwantung 229 Army of your choice. So the state of Manchu, for which the Japanese military demanded the establishment of the most just and perfect form of government, was under the yoke of this very military.